Welcome. My name is AJ D'Amico, and I am the director of Knight Foundation's Media and Democracy program. For 75 years, Knight Foundation has sought to strengthen American democracy through funding journalism across the country, and arts and culture projects in community, and the success of American cities where the Knight brothers once published newspapers. One of those cities is Miami, where the Knight brothers once owned the Miami Herald. Its rise as an American metropolis is nothing short of magic. Both our skyline and our collective story reflect the resilience, the ingenuity, the cultural vibrancy that defined the generations before us. And today, you get the sense that Miami has just begun a new chapter with new characters and new stories to be told. And I believe that if our community's next chapter is better than the last, it will be because the people in this room write it. In this room are nonprofit and business leaders, public servants, artists, lawyers, academics, content creators, and students who make up Miami's next generation of civic leadership and represent our city's future. As Miami's next chapter unfolds, we not only have an opportunity, but we have an obligation to take responsibility for both our community and one another. So this is all to say that we are incredibly excited and honored to host someone whose own story of civic engagement serves as an inspiring example. Justice Sotomayor, on behalf of Knight Foundation and the entire Miami community, thank you for visiting our home. I also want to thank iCivics and St. Thomas University for their partnership and Miami Dade College for serving as our host. I would like to remind the audience that photos and videos are not permitted during the program. And now I would like to welcome the first woman president of Miami Dade College, Madeline Pumuriega, to introduce our featured speakers.
AJ stays. AJ and Maria, wave. They have put this together, and I just want to thank them for your leadership and for everything today. Good evening. What a special night it is indeed to be here as the first female president of Miami Dade College and the first Hispanic chancellor of the state of Florida, as I introduce the first female president of the Knight Foundation and the third Supreme Court justice, but the first Hispanic. And it is indeed, as AJ says, special to be doing that in the Magic City, to be doing it here at Miami Dade College, where we serve 125,000 students, the most diverse institution in this country. 163 countries are represented in our student body, and on any given day, 43 languages are spoken throughout our college. But all of that is tied to one pursuit, and that is the pursuit of the American dream through the power of education. And so it is really an honor to be hosting this event this evening. And I have to tell you that I love the justice because, she said, I want to see students. And so we took a few minutes, and she had an opportunity to hear the dreams and aspirations of students from Miami Dade College, the University of Miami, and Florida International University. So thank you for sharing that moment with the Justice. And if you're a student from any one of our institutions, please stand. I want to let each of you know you inspire us. And we know that the world is okay and that the future is bright because of you. So thank you, and you may be seated. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from two esteemed leaders who have broken barriers and paved the way for others to follow. Maribel Pérez Wadsworth, the president and CEO of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. As the first woman to lead the foundation, she continues to expand its vision and impact, ensuring that communities stay informed and engaged. Joining Maribel is our guest honor this evening, the Honorable U.S. Supreme Court Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor, a true pillar of justice for our nation. I would like to welcome them both to the stage. As I leave you with them, they have both dedicated their career to upholding the values of this country, one through a stellar career in journalism and one to a great service to our nation. So you're in for a special treat. Buenas noches.
Thank you so much, Madeline, for that great introduction, and thank you, Justice, for this gift to our community of the amount of time that you're spending. You were at St. Thomas University earlier today. You're here now. Tomorrow you're spending time with 500 Miami-Dade County Public School students. Tell us why you're here. How are you connected to Miami, and why was it so important for you to spend time with our young people?
Well, two connections to Miami. First, with me tonight is a dear friend from law school, Rudy Aragon, who was a lawyer who practiced in some of the biggest law firms in Miami. And we were classmates at Yale. And our third year, he announced that he was going to come practice in Miami. Now, you have to understand, back then, Miami was a little bit of a sleepy backwater. And at Yale, Miami was not the city that you went to. And the rest of us who were close friends with him were thinking, está un poquito loco. And he kept insisting that it was one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, and that it was a powerful place for Latinos and Latino leaders, and that the business spirit of Miami was going to have a huge impact in not only in the economy of Florida, but in the economy of the nation. You know, he came. I would visit him periodically. He kept moving from one nice house to another nice house to another nice house. He made more money than any of us. And he's been incredibly active in the community here. And so he was my first draw to Miami. Then my mother did move to Miami, moved to Margate, Florida in 1992. The reason I can't forget the year is because she waited for my induction as a district court judge, went on a supposed vacation, and 2 weeks later she calls me and she says, I'm moving to Florida. My husband, her then husband, hated New York cold, and they came here and fell in love with Florida. So since then, I would come frequently to Florida. I would come every year, multiple times, mostly to visit her, but to travel around and see it. So I now have friends who are family here, and I feel like I'm tied to both this city and the state in important ways because I'm familiar with it.
So you could just come visit your friends, but you decided to really pack your schedule these few days. Why was that important?
I'm a storyteller, so you got to live through my stories, okay? The day I went to the Supreme Court after I was sworn in, outside my office door were those tremendously large garbage things that they take the garbage from all of the offices and dump it into. So you know how big that is, okay? There were 3 of them outside my office. And I'm like, what are these? And mail. I pulled my hand in, and it was invitations, and some were congratulations. And a few minutes later, one of the mail delivery people walks by, and I said, 3 of these? And he said, no, 6, there's 3 more downstairs.
Oh my goodness.
I looked at my then assistant and said to her, wait a minute. I'm going to have to respond to all of this, but I can't do it immediately. Let's sort it out. And let's sort it out by topic and activity. And so the ones that were congratulations, the other friend who helped me with this, another lawyer friend, helped me devise the letters to respond to people who had written to me. And to this day, I take those forms and I personalize them, because every letter has something personal that the person's asking me. So they're getting a personal response, but I respond. The other half were literally invitations to every activity in the world, okay? You name it, people ask me. I've traveled the world to do rule of law teaching. I've been to universities. I've met kings and presidents of countries. Some of them have come to the Supreme Court to meet me. I've met with Supreme Courts, state Supreme Courts in the United States, and also Supreme Courts around the world. If it was only legal, all of those meetings would eat up all my time. Just that, okay? Then there are invitations from colleges all over the country, from law schools all over the country, from grammar schools all over the countries, but there's book clubs. There are academic conferences that want me to speak. The list is just endless of activities that people want me to do. But I have a job. And the job requires attention. The work requires attention. If I did everything I was invited to, I wouldn't be able to work, okay? There's no way to do that. Literally, I wouldn't work or sleep, okay? So I had to make a decision of, what do I choose to say yes to, all right? And I made a very conscious decision, and really after a lot of thought, where can my presence make the greatest impact? And my decision was talking to young people, trying to inspire them to understand the power they have. Because I didn't know it when I was growing up, that I had any power. I also, for those of you who know my story, didn't grow up in an environment where I actually believed that I could become something great. You know, from where I started and where I've landed, it's a huge road. But I got here.
You did.
And even though I had many challenges growing up, the same that many people of my background have, if not all, I did reach this place.
It's
and I
nothing
wanted
short
to inspire.
of remarkable, and certainly you are an inspiration. I'd love to touch on that a little bit more, because the trajectory from the projects in the Bronx to a seat on the Supreme Court is paved with incredible resilience. You mentioned challenges, of course there would be. Talk a little bit about what resilience means to you.
This is a saying that then Vice President Joe Biden told me. And it's become my definition of resilience, okay? He told me that it was what his mother said to him. And the minute he said it, I knew it reflected my life and how my definition of resilience. It was his mother told him, Joe, I'm quoting him, okay? I don't call him Joe. Joe, people's character are not measured by the number of times that they're knocked down. It's measured by the number of times that they can get up and try again. Mm-hmm. And that's what my definition of resilience is. I look at law students, and I know the audience has a few of them, but I think of almost every profession. No one's 100% successful at every moment in what they do. Right. If you're a lawyer, you're going to lose cases. Even if you're a transactional lawyer, there are going to be some cases that go awry, some deals that go awry. Perfection is impossible in anything you do. A doctor, regretfully and woefully, is going to lose a patient. If you're not, it's because you're doing something easy. But if you decide to confront life with all its complexities, then success and failure are a part of it. And to me, trying is what's important. It's not whether you succeed.
Yeah.
It's trying and learning from those failures. That way, when you succeed, you can enjoy it more.
I think that's such an important message, and it reminds me, you made that point about your mother, that one of the things that she taught you and expected from you was the trying.
Yes.
She didn't expect the A's, she expected you to try your very best. Tell us more about what your mother represented for you. She clearly had a big impact, and she wanted and toiled hard to make sure that you and your brother had the very best education. What did your mother represent for you?
Everything. I have often said that if I'm half the woman that she is, then I'm very lucky, because she was extraordinary. My mother taught me about community, and that civic participation in community is not just government service.
Right.
That it is something much, much broader, bigger and smaller at the same time. That civic participation is each and every one of us attempting every day of our life to do small and as many big things as we can to make the world a better place. And for her, that was being the nurse for our projects and for the places we lived. Everybody knew Selena. And I can't tell you the number of times there was a knock on the door to say, I heard your mother's a nurse, will she answer a question? And inevitably, Mommy would disappear to go help somebody do something. Take a shot, figure out a medical machine, whatever it was. My aunt, when she died, my mother's sister, when she died, we found, it was extraordinary. There was a stack of letters from every charity in the United States. St. Jude's Hospital, Shriners, you name any church, any not-for-profit, all of them got a quarter or 50 cents. I was sitting there thinking of how many stamps she must have used and how inefficient this was. But I recognized in a woman who lived on the bottom level of Social Security, okay? Because she had never earned hardly anything in her life. A lot of it was earned in being a seamstress where it was off the books, okay? So her reported income was next to nothing. And yet, for someone who had nothing, she wanted to help others. My grandmother fed the whole neighborhood. From example of the women in my life in particular, I saw that community building is not about taking on always the big projects.
That's right.
It's taking on the little ones too. And I tell audiences, especially of students, you have an obligation to be publicly minded, but not in the sense of becoming a lawyer or a doctor or a firefighter or a police officer. It really doesn't matter what you do. You can be a bus driver, you can be a firefighter. My mother would say to me, you could clean toilets, I don't care. But whatever you do, be the best at it that you can be. And secondly, when you do it with a smile. And that smile is not unimportant, because it makes the world and people around you feel better. And that's what you do for community. You give outreach as you can, within your talents, within whatever limitations you have. But every one of us has an obligation to be a member of your community and help it. And if you see a problem and you can do something about it, you have an obligation to try. And whether you fail or don't, it's the trying that's important. So that finishes the first question you asked me. Why do I speak to young people? We adults have messed up the world for you. Think about it. We have 2 world wars going on, or 2 wars. We have countless local frictions. We have health problems, environmental problems, income disparity problems, educational disparity problems, you name it. What are we giving you? A world full of problems. If you're relying on the adults to fix it, it ain't going to happen. So what you have to do is realize, if you're a young person, that you have not only the energy, but you still have not been worn down by life. You should have the optimism necessary to change the world. And that's what I want you to do. That's why I come speak to you. Because I want you to believe in your power to make the world a better place. You have all the bad examples from us. Do a better job. Try it in a different way. Maybe the things we tried, you see that we implemented them poorly. Whatever your answer you come to, don't give up. Continue believing in your power, because it's boundless if you believe in yourselves. And so for me, that's why I do this.
Yeah. One of the things that you said that's really stuck with me is this idea that there are no bystanders in this life. And I think that's such an important idea, this idea that every individual has that power, as you're talking about. You, last year at an event with Justice Amy Coney Barrett, you made, in fact, I'll just read it because I think it's such an important statement. You said, civic engagement is not merely about electoral politics. It is about every act we do as a little c citizen to help solve a problem that the community has. It is what we undertake as individuals to help resolve difficulties in the world around us. What's one thing, and I'm always very action-oriented, what's one thing that each person here has the power to do when they walk out the door?
Well, I'm not walking out the door, but there isn't a person in this room that has an excuse for not voting. And I tell every audience of students I go to, college students only have a 50% rate of voting. That's inexcusable. And to me, it's inexcusable. I firmly believe that in a republic like ours, voting is our voice. And that means whether you like politics or not, and I don't care if you don't like it, but that's where the bystander statement comes by. Laws are made by whom? By people. So who changes laws? People. And they don't get changed by being a bystander in life and letting things you don't like roll over you. Whether it's a truck hitting you or a bus hitting you or a car hitting you, if you stare at it and don't do anything, if you don't move out of the way, you're going to get hit and smashed. And that'll be the quality of your life. So if you want a better life, you have to understand that you have to do something to change its quality. You have to maintain this republic. Those were Ben Franklin's words when he was coming out of the Constitutional Convention. A woman stopped him and said, what kind of government do we have? And his response was, a republic if you can keep it. But one of my colleagues, Neil Gorsuch, says, democracy is messy business. It is messy business because democracy means that everybody has a voice. And voices become tension-filled and a cacophony can get very loud and overwhelming. But you can also guide our republic to a better place if you participate and join with others who think or feel like you do to affect change. But you got to fight for it. It doesn't sit back and it doesn't just happen. It happens because we care as people.
And you have to engage one another. I'd love
Absolutely.
to turn a little bit on that point to civility and civil discourse broadly. Some of the most memorable lines from opinions in the last Supreme Court term came from your dissents. Legal issues aside, how you dissent reflects, I think, to me, a remarkable ability to make a very pointed argument while also being respectful in disagreement and civil in disagreement with your colleagues. What do you hope citizens draw from those dissents? And do you think there are lessons that we can take away for how members of the court disagree with one another that we could apply to our broader civil discourse?
People are all surprised about the fact that justices from whatever backgrounds and how often they agree or don't agree, that we are in public, like I was with Amy Comey Barrett, is the way I am with all of my colleagues. We really do have a civil discourse. We actually sit around a table and vote. And in our voting, we have certain protocols, one of them which is very important. We go in order when we're discussing a case from the most senior justice, who always starts with the chief. And then it goes down and around the table in descending order of seniority. And our protocol is that no justice is interrupted. They get to say what they want to say. And we go around the table, and then there's sometimes further exchange back and forth. And then we're sort of having a cross conversation. But the first and most important part is listen. Too many people spend their time in discourse arguing their position instead of listening to the other person's position. And unless you listen, you can't determine what's really bothering the person. And until you determine that, you can't determine whether there's a way of approaching the problem that could use that can be a compromise in some way. But it is that listening to each other, not the agreeing with each other. And that's what people don't understand, which is it's the courtesy of knowing that we're listening to each other that permits us to remain cordial, even when we are vehemently opposed to each other in the legal answer. Mm-hmm. And if you read our opinions, it's argument, but it's not personal argument. I'm not accusing them of being stupid. I'm not accusing them of having ill intentions or ill will. Too many people, when they hear political opponents, automatically ascribe bad intentions to them. They're bad people. Mm-hmm. People who you disagree with are not bad people. They have different ideas. And they genuinely, my colleagues, whom I disagree with frequently, are not bad people. Yeah. We both love this country. All of us love this country. All of us love our Constitution and our system of governance. All of us are passionate about protecting them. We disagree about what's best to do that. And we're trying to engage each other in understanding what the other thinks will improve that dynamic. But it's never that I think they're bad people. Mm-hmm. You know, I often say, good people do bad things. Good colleagues sometimes have silly thoughts. But it doesn't make them bad or silly.
In that act of active listening and respectful exchange, you all come with strong arguments. Does that active listening from time to time result in persuasion?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in ways the public, well, just take something you can see, which is look at our voting. Yes, there are opinions where you can see the divide and imagine that it's all political. You know, it's 6 the conservatives and 3 the liberals. But it's not always that way. Mm-hmm. Certainly there are some cases, often they're constitutional cases for the following reason. Because we all have our ways of approaching the Constitution. And that way of approaching things might be a decent indicator of where we might come out, okay? But if you look at the rest of our cases, and most of them, you'll see big divides that are not ideological in terms of politics. They are really different ways of using statutory interpretation tools to come to an answer. And you can tell what a justice values in terms of which tool they think is more important than the other. But it's not made up. It is very much using standard tools of interpretation and saying, those standard tools lead me to this result. Mm-hmm. And that's why our decisions can be 5-4, sometimes, and the mixture of peoples can be dramatically different. And we have those kind of cases all of the time. And that's because we are thinking about each legal problem on its own. Not every statute is the same, not every business issue is the same, not anything else is the same, and neither are responses the same to everything.
I think that level of transparency around the nuance of all of these questions is so important, because we often these days are talking about the erosion of trust in our institutions. I know this is a topic that has been, near to you. Just last week, while you were visiting Kentucky, you made the point, you had, concerns that the court gets ahead of public opinion. There have been a lot of precedents overturned that leads to further concerns about the trustworthiness of our institutions, maybe the Supreme Court specifically. What are the steps, do you think, that the court and other institutions need to take to strengthen public confidence?
Well, I did speak about it last week. For the court itself, what I have explained is that most people believe that law is black and white. They think, and they don't understand why we disagree, because it's the law. Mm-hmm. And you should be able to get an answer clearly. And law is not black and white, law is gray. And it's gray because very few laws are written in such precise terms that you can tell its limits exactly, all right? And the Constitution says no unreasonable search and seizures. How do you define what's unreasonable? It's a bit of trial and error, isn't it? It's the development of law and precedent that sort of defines the parameters of that. And that's almost all things are written in that way. No undue delay. That's a favorite lawyer's term, okay? What's undue? When is it undue? What circumstances is it undue? Those are why you hire lawyers and why you have judges, to try to figure out what the parameters of law are and of what the parameters of whatever words are chosen are. But people come away with discomfort with that. One of my colleagues said, we're only umpires. And my retort is, have any of you been umpires? Is the ball in or out? What do you do when it's right on the line? The umpire has to call it. Those are judgments. And that's what life is a series of judgments, but people can get uncomfortable with that. Yeah. When I said don't get ahead of public opinion, I think that was not quite what I said. Mm. We don't decide on the basis of public opinion, but we must be cognizant that every time we upset precedent, we upset people's expectation in the stability of law. Mm. It rocks the boat in a way that makes people uneasy about whether they're protected or not protected by the law. And so there are circumstances where we have and should do it. Brown versus Board of Education was a dramatic change from existing law. Not so dramatic if you had actually watched the evolution of what had happened after Plessy versus Ferguson in 1898. That was the case that said separate but equal. There had been from that time till Brown versus Board of Education cases throughout the United States, many of them brought by Thurgood Marshall and his team, that were challenging the premises of that. Cases that in certain states were saying, we said separate but equal, but if you have a white law school and you don't have a black law school, there's nothing separate and equal about that, okay? And so we had cases like that sort of telling the states, wait a minute, we meant it when we said separate, but it has, you know. And then slowly cases started coming and showing the inequality until you got a Supreme Court who, through many, many amicus briefs, looked at the record and realized something very important. And the case was originally argued this way, which was the arguments were first that the equality wasn't real, all right? And that's how Thurgood Marshall's team started in the courts. At a certain point, they realized it's not just that that equality isn't equal, but it's not faithful to the meaning of the Constitution, the equal protection of the law, and that it was a dignitary harm that you didn't have to measure by how many professors the school had or what resources the school had, but by whether it was consonant with a civil war that had promised equality to all its citizens. And so that's when the shift came. And the court there was a little bit ahead of the society. And as you know, public opinion wasn't uniformly in favor of it.
That's right.
In fact, there was a huge amount of resistance. There was a question whether President Eisenhower would enforce the court orders of desegregation. And all of you know Norman Rockwell's famous painting with the little African-American girl dressed in a white outfit being walked by marshals to her school. Famous painting. There were many of those, but there was a question whether Eisenhower was going to send the police, the marshals, to do that. And he did. And he obeyed the law, even though he personally disagreed with it. But having said that, most of the time, the court doesn't go ahead of public opinion. We never did with women's rights, because the court isn't a social engine. The court is an enforcer of the laws that the society passes. And on women's rights, it was women in the political arena who got voting in 1920. It was not the courts. And up until Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor came to the court, women lost in the Supreme Court. We have Supreme Court cases saying women could be denied certain areas of practice in law. They couldn't be prosecutors or defense attorneys because their frail constitutions would not cope with that sordid work. Those were the terms used to deny women being butchers. All right? The court, my court, was really far behind equality. It wasn't until Title VII, the Equal Pay Act, all of the other things that got passed by the society, that the court could then step in and enforce what laws had been written. So it is, we walk a very tight line, and that line, but it's one that involves all of you as citizens with a small c, being engaged in moving the law forward.
You just referenced President Eisenhower and the question of whether he would enforce the court's decision. I think that's a really timely topic.
I'm not getting too much into that.
No. But this, broadly speaking, the relationship between the branches of government, the checks and balances in our system. How do you view the continued relevance of these founding principles of checks and balances in maintaining our constitutional democracy?
You know, our founders believed that they had created a pretty, and they had, and have, created a pretty incredible checks and balances system. The woman who asked Franklin, she said, "Do we have a monarchy or something else?" Mm-hmm. And his response was a republic. Our founders were hell-bent on ensuring that we didn't have a monarchy. And the first way they thought of that was to give Congress the power of the purse. And because that's an incredible power. They gave the presidency the power of the military. And that's also, and that means not just armed forces, but law enforcement, which is an incredible obligation of a president. They gave the courts the power to interpret. Mm-hmm. And we have to do it by persuasion. We have to, in our opinions, make it clear to the society, to the presidents, to the Congress, to the people, that we are doing things based on law and the Constitution as we are interpreting it fairly. And so our goodwill or our power is the power of reason. And that's, most people would consider a soft power, mm-hmm. but it's the most powerful of all of it. Because money can be taken away by Congress. If they give it, they can take it away. A president has 4 years and he or she could be removed. Those things are ephemeral in that sense of it. Court decisions stand, whether one particular person chooses to abide by them or not. It doesn't change the foundation, mm-hmm. that it's still a court order that someone will respect at some point. Mm. That's the faith I have in our system. And that other actors in the system, whether it's Congress or others, will follow the law because it's what we all take an oath of office to do.
I think it's important and timely. Another one of our institutions that has suffered from eroding trust, but was so critical that our founding fathers insisted on naming it in our First Amendment, and that is the
freedom of the press.
Freedom of the press and the news media. And of course, that's the world I come from and something that I and Knight Foundation spend so much time really working to reinvigorate in our nation. I'd love to hear a little bit from you about how important you feel the role of the press is for our country, for our democracy, and to the extent you wish to share with us, where do you turn to for your news and information?
I mean, I'm not going to name names.
I tried.
But I will say the following. Many have called the press in the past the fourth branch of government, because the press has always brought transparency to whatever the other three branches are. And that's fundamental to a republic or a democracy, because it is truth that lets people see and make informed choices. The internet is creating an extraordinary challenge to the press and to the world, because it's largely unregulated. It has no standards of conduct. You know, most newspapers and news channels have requirements of vetting the information that they're disseminating. Walter Cronkite was one of the most respected men in his era. If Walter said it, everybody believed it, all right? And they had reason to, because Walter Cronkite, as a newscaster, had an incredible code of honor. And every word he spoke was vetted completely. Don't have that anymore. And so what the press is dealing with is the same thing government is in almost the same way, which is a lack of trust.
Yes.
But I am not, I mean, papers and newscasters, podcasters and internet users, integrity comes from within. Whatever the law permits you to do is the minimum standard of conduct. That's not the standard that you should be aspiring to. Everyone who interacts on the internet should impose their own higher standard of integrity. What are you going to report on? When? Are you going to take unverified information and just pass it on? People will get to know the news sources that are more reliable in that respect. It may take time, but they start doing that. And all of us have an obligation too right now, which is information literacy is the most important topic of our society today. That's what, in part, the Knight Foundation is trying to promote. That's what my organization, iCivics.org, is doing. We have whole lessons on information literacy, of learning about how to check facts. Wikipedia is not reliable facts. Don't cite Wikipedia in your papers, okay? But you have to learn how to be a real researcher. You have to go back to original sources. You cannot depend on what people are telling you. Before you make choices about the direction anything should be going in this country, actually study it. And don't trust that any one news source is giving you the whole picture. No matter how reliable you feel they've been, that's a dangerous practice in a world that has changed so dramatically. When I was growing up, there were 3 main news channels. Now there are hundreds, if not thousands, sometimes. And I turn on the TV and I don't know where to start. You know, and talking about on the internet, you can get lost in the materials to digest. News literacy is the obligation of all of us to become more knowledgeable on how to get accurate information.
Thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. And I know that we have so many of our students here across the local universities, and I know it's a topic that's so pressing. I feel like I need to jump on that same soapbox because I really think fundamentally, if we don't have information literacy, if we don't have news literacy, we simply are not equipped to make decisions.
We're going to lose our democracy. We will lose our democracy if all of you, particularly you young people, but everyone, makes it their responsibility to be literate about the basis for your decision making.
We have a lot of people in this room who are leaders across sectors. Academic leaders, we have business leaders, we have student leaders, we have folks who are active in our arts and culture in South Florida. I'd love to hear a little bit about how each of these folks could inspire, using their own platforms and their own reach and voice. How could they inspire the community and use their platforms to public good?
There's a sign upstairs on one of a poster on the floor that I got out of, and it said, "World change happens through inspiration, education, and a smile." I'm going to change that. It happens through inspiration, education, and passion. Most leaders are followed because of the passion that they have in their vision. People will follow those who are wide-eyed and really, you believe, are caring about whatever they're leading on. And they show it in not only their words, but in their actions. And so if you're a leader of any kind, do not be afraid to exhibit your passion. It's your greatest selling point. It is what convinces people to follow you. And so for me, if you don't know I love the law, then I failed today. But I don't think anybody ever walks away from a conversation with me who doesn't know I'm passionate about what I do. Mm-hmm. And I hope that with that passion I set an example that motivates people to want to learn more, to want to do more in civic participation in the activities they're involved in. But I think leaders, you have to show and you have to make people believe this is important by the depth of your commitment to what you're doing.
That point about passion, so critically important. Along that same lines, about these things that we're passionate about, what might our audience here today draw from the courts and the legal system's considered, measured approach to evidence to inform their decisions? How do we potentially look to that practice as a means to engage our fellow community, to persuade them to ideas, to work on solutions to our shared challenges?
Well, the wonderful part of a court is, especially when you have a majority and a dissenting opinion, and sometimes when you have a concurrence, is that each side is setting forth their best arguments. And each side is showing the holes in the opposite side's logic. And we're testing each other. I can't tell you how many majority opinions improve once the first draft of the dissent comes in, because you've poked so many holes in the majority's arguments that they've got to drop them, they've got to tighten them, they've got to, up their game because of the dissent. And most of the time, we're going back and forth until each side has set forth their very best and strongest arguments. When anybody takes a shortcut, the opposite side's going to really pounce on them. All right? And then you as citizens can look at the sources we're citing and make up your own minds, all right? But that's what it takes to have discourse, which is to listen and understand each side and respond to yourself, because you always, if you read anyone's opinion as a justice, they start out with, this is my view. This is what I think the answer is and why. And the second half is, the other side's wrong for these reasons. Or, this person, if it's a majority opinion, these arguments don't persuade us for this reason. But you always start out with, this is what is making me come to my conclusion first. And the other side then has to explain why that's not persuasive. and maintain the person's belief at the end of reading the decision. One of the things that I find distressing is how many people in this room have actually read a Supreme Court decision cover to cover. The entire majority. This is a good answer, but look at how many hands are not up. All right? Look at how many hands are not up. And it's not because any of you are illiterate or not educated or not informed. You're here because you're caring citizens, okay? It's because most people don't believe they would understand the Supreme Court opinion. But unless you try it, you won't know that. And once you try it and you read it cover to cover, whatever your initial impression was, I suspect you will pause and say, wait a minute, the other side's made some good points. That happens to me. I read the briefs of both sides. I start with the petitioner, that's the first person who's bringing the case. I read the petitioner's brief and I think, wow, that's pretty powerful. Then I read the respondent's brief and I go, oh, that's a good answer. And then I study the problem and I figure out what I think the right answer is, okay? But my point is that you will do the same, but most people don't.
That's right.
And you do, to be an informed citizen, it would help if you did. Because then you can have an informed thought about the legal issue that is less driven by politics or passion and more driven by what you think the right answer is for the legal situation at issue.
So everybody has an assignment. You
Pick
will
one.
Pick
okay?
one.
Pick one.
And read it. And send mail to the justice, letting her know what you think. I want to ask one final question before we go to a couple of student questions, because I think this is something that many of us in this room have in common, and that is having the experience of being the first woman or the first Latina or the first person of color to hold a role. I'd love for you to share what advice you have from your own experiences in navigating that unique experience while retaining, the integrity of your own self and authenticity to your values.
I attempt to integrate myself into whatever new institution I'm a part of. I've never, as a student or professionally, isolated myself. I have used my identity to form security blankets for myself. So it just so happened that the 5 men at law school that I became friends with were all people of color, because we came somewhat, not from similar backgrounds. One was another Puerto Rican, and one was a Mexican American, one was a Navy American, a Native American, and one was a black. And those were my 5 closest friends. There weren't that many women at Yale at the time, so my choices of friends among women were more limited, but there were even less people of color. But I used them as an anchor for security. I did the same at Princeton, but I joined all other things at the law school. I was at the Yale Law Journal, I worked on admissions, I did a bunch of different things. I became managing editor of the Yale Law Journal on World Public Order. It's no longer around. But I was the managing editor of that as well. And I participated in the activities of the law school, not just the activities involving my friends. At the court, I'm the first one at every party. I'm the first one at every event. Whatever organization is holding it, whether it's the Historical Society or the people come to the court for all sorts of events, like, state court judges, attorney generals. I go to a lot of those things. And I go because I think it's important to be a part of the institution that I'm in. I take time to learn about the people that I'm working with. Not just the people that I feel comfortable with, but the people who I don't know. With my colleagues, I learn about them as people. I try to meet their families. I try to learn about what their interests, a lot of it I know from the confirmation process, okay? But what their interests are, what are the things that they enjoy. I try to relate to the institution I'm in and become a part of its traditions. I try to go to every employee. Every year we have an employee recognition day. Never miss those.
That's great.
That's important to be there. We have a yearly spring barbecue. I'm the justice who did hamburgers until I found out that if you stand behind the grill in a nice outfit, the smell attaches. So now I don't do that. I do service, but I don't do that, okay? But the point that I'm there, be present, be a part of the environment you're in, gets you to become a part of that world. How you stay true to the other part of you is what I did, which is ensuring that you maintain connections with those things that are important to you. My Latino, Black, Native American, Mexican American friends are still lifelong friends. I have friends from every other background as well. But they are an integral part of my life experience. My family has been critical to me. My family has been a part of every life experience I have. My mother, my brother, my cousins, some of my relatives all traveled to Princeton and to Yale. This was an extraordinary experience for most of them, okay? I tell people that unlike my classmates whose parents could afford hotels, my family couldn't. Everybody brought blankets. This is before air mattresses, okay? They brought blankets and pillows with them. And my small room fit 6 of us at a time on the floor, all right? I took my mother and my family to the eating hall. My mother's one experience at the eating hall, every time she came, she took me to a Chinese restaurant to feed me. And she brought lots of food with her.
Of course she did.
So that was really important, okay? My Mexican-American friend, when she came back at Christmas, she came back with food that was sent by her mother. Our group, I wasn't a very good cook at that point, but my group of Puerto Rican friends, we would have a Puerto Rican meal every holiday, around the holiday before we left for home. I brought the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater to Princeton to put a show on. I created a class on Puerto Rican history at Princeton. My note at Yale was on Puerto Rican seabed rights. And those things kept me connected to my community, but without it keeping me separate from the institution I was in. And that's what I still do. I think I may be the only justice that has had a Latino wedding at the court. And we don't have music because you can't play music at the court. Well, that's not true. We can play music. We just can't dance at the court. But we've had salsa.
Was photography allowed at this wedding?
Yeah, it was. And I had a portrait unveiling in December, I think it was. I've now forgotten when it was. And the cook of our cafeteria asked me what I wanted, and I wanted something with a Latino spice to it. And the man sat out in the rain with an umbrella to roast a pig because the court's oven wasn't big enough for the pig. And everybody ate benin, all right? All the Puerto Ricans were there, all the Latinos, but there were a lot of other folks from a lot of different backgrounds. I have never either denied my culture or hidden my love of my Spanish or my love of salsa or of our music, las plenas. For those who don't know, that's a very traditional Puerto Rican form of music that does rhymes. So every verse is in rhymes. It's very hard to do, but it's quite old in Puerto Rico and very beautiful. All of these things are important to me, and I share them. I take pride in them, and I've never hidden from them. And that's what we all have to do in these spaces. We have to enjoy the new things and become a part of them and take with us who we are. And I tell kids, bring your families with you. When I visit colleges and I speak to a lot of, because in this audience there's an awful lot of people with backgrounds similar to mine. You can see it in their faces, okay? I ask, how many of you have brought your parents and grandparents here? And there's always a fear that they won't understand or they'll feel awkward. That's okay. Because if they do, maybe they'll know a little bit of how you feel. And maybe they'll be able to understand some of your insecurity and your sense of fear in these environments. And it's nice for them to help you with that. It's all right for your mother to say, Nena, nada va a pasar, tú vas a estar bien. You know, it's okay to hear that, but they have to understand it, and unless you show it to them, they won't see it.
That's right. That's right. So important. Integrate, but also hold on to your own.
Exactly.
On that note, I want to open this up to two of our students, starting with Noah Feinberg from Florida International University.
Hello, Noah.
Good evening, Madam Justice.
Wait a minute. You're a lawyer, right?
Second year law student. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
My question is, the judiciary is often referred to as the non-political branch of the government, but what role do you believe public opinion should have on the court, especially when major societal implications are involved?
Public opinion should not dictate outcomes, because we're there for that not to happen, okay? Our founding fathers gave federal judges lifetime appointments so they wouldn't be subject to political pressure. And we should never use political opinion to change what we believe is the right thing in law, okay? But it counsels us to be sensitive to how we're expressing ourselves. Think about Marbury versus Madison, which is a seminal Supreme Court case, okay? It was the one that announced that the courts were the last arbiter of the constitutionality of laws. Some today would have called that a made-up doctrine, because the Constitution doesn't say that. And in fact, most governments and all other governments in the world, parliamentary procedures, et cetera, didn't have that rule. And still some parliamentary democracies do not have courts being the final arbiter. The legislature is, their parliaments are. So this was revolutionary, okay? But when you read the decision, you have it explaining why this was the logical outgrowth of the constitutional structure that, and the founding fathers had created a tripartite system with checks and balances. And it reasoned from those checks and balances that there had to be some power that the courts wielded. Otherwise, we wouldn't be checking any of the other two branches. And that check was intended to be us being the guardians of constitutional rights. And it's a brilliant piece of legal work, but it's not based on anything, plain meaning of anything, okay? There's no literal words that do this. But think about what the court did at the end. Most people don't pay attention to this. The issue was whether the president had unconstitutionally failed to deliver a signed commission to a new judge. All right? And the court said it was unconstitutional to do that, for the president not to do it. But the court didn't order the president to do it, who was Jefferson. And the court knew Jefferson wasn't going to obey that order. And what it did was to rely on a statute defining the remedial powers of the court to say that we didn't have the power to order it, but that we assume that moving forward, the law would be followed. It was a very elegant way of avoiding the crisis, but also setting out what the law was. Now, to the person who didn't get the commission, it was not a win, all right? But it established a rule for our country that we have been following ever since. And largely, we have had presidents follow the rule of law. There have been some exceptions. Lincoln didn't in one episode during war. Andrew Jackson didn't follow a court ruling, and the Oklahoma the Trail of Tears followed, and he did nothing to stop it, even though the court said he should. So we've had moments where it's been tested, but by and large, we have been a country who has understood that the rule of law has helped us maintain our democracy. But it's also because the court has proceeded cautiously and has proceeded understanding that it has to proceed slowly, that it can't get so far ahead of the society that the society rebels and ignores it, but it can't fall so far behind the society to not do the right thing either. We just have to march with time in a way that's measured and deliberate and careful. Lay the foundation. That's why I'm an advocate of us moving slowly, and if you're going to undo precedent, do it in small measures. Let the society absorb the steps. Let them see what the outcome is of what you're saying. Let them experience it, and then take the next step, and then the next step. It's easy to do if you're following the law, because we are supposed to be a common law nation where each case is decided on the individual facts before you, and you don't try to reach out more broadly. We've had bad results when we've done that, when we reach more broadly than the parties have argued before us.
The next question comes from Amanda Sarmientos from the University of Miami Law School.
Thank you so much, Your Honor. My question is, in today's society, especially as law students, there's so much information out there about what jobs we should aspire to, how much money we should be making, and what success looks like, that it becomes very noisy and very hard to discern which expectations are personal and which are external. There's a famous quote of yours, "I don't measure myself by others' expectations or let others define my worth." What was your path towards that decision, and how has it impacted your life?
I'm going to give an example of that. When I was graduating from Yale, fortuity led me to meet Robert Morgenthau, the head of the Manhattan DA's office. I had been intending to be an international commercial lawyer. Most of my classes were in international law. I had taken one trial advocacy class. I had done a barrister's union. I had a sense that I was good on my feet and that I might be a good trial lawyer, but that wasn't what I had really concentrated on. But I had a moment of making that, of him, meeting him, and he basically wooing me and offering me a job. And after having been in his office, listened to him, and spoken to people, I threw away my playbook and took a chance, because I thought I could be good at this. And I turned out to be pretty good at it, okay? Most my advisors at Yale were telling me not to do it. My friends were telling me not to do it because it would hinder my career development. But I took a chance because I knew myself. I knew that there were things I wanted to learn that I still hadn't in law school about the practice of law and about thinking like a lawyer and how I could write memos as an advocate rather than as an academic, which I had not done very well at my law firm job that's prior summer. So it turned out to be the best decision for me. It wasn't the most glamorous job. Law firms were paying, Rudy, $40,000 to $60,000 back then, around then. And the DA's office, I started at $17,500. And I had student loans. And I'm thinking, how am I going to do this? And I thought about it, and I realized that that was the salary my mother was earning. And she raised 2 children. And I thought to myself, if she can raise 2 children, I can live on $17,500. You know? You've got to put these things in perspective. And you have to put other people's expectations in perspective. Because what's important to them is driven by their own passions. You have to stay true to yourself and figure out where your passions lie and what makes you feel better about what you're doing. And you have to define your success not by what they see, but for the goals you set for yourself. I have told kids everywhere. One of them the other day at a high school said, "How'd you get so far? You started at the very bottom. Do you have any idea how high you are? How do you do that?" And I looked at her and I said, by one step at a time. I didn't aspire to be a Supreme Court justice. I aspired to graduate from high school, college, and law school and get a job. My greatest dream was to be a trial lawyer, because I had no real understanding as a child, except from television, that any other kind of lawyering or judging existed, okay? That's as far as I got in my dreams. But as I pursued them, I took every opportunity to take one step forward each experience. My book is filled with how I went about learning how to write English properly, in improving my writing skills. That took a lot of effort for me to do. My book is filled with how I didn't do well at my summer jobs as a lawyer, but I went out to become as good a lawyer as I could. And I've sort of managed it, but it was all one step at a time. And always trying my hardest at every job that I did. I never said yes to doing something unless I finished it. And I always tried to do as well as I could. And to my surprise, when I was interviewed by Senator Moynihan's selection committee for district court judges, because district court judges are recommended to the White House by the senator of that state, and Moynihan was my senator. There were, I can't remember the exact number of people, but it was a big committee. It was 16 or 20 people. It was huge. I didn't know anybody on that committee. I found out later that everybody in the committee knew somebody I knew. Because I had done various community activities and people had liked what I've done and they were able to report back positively about me. So it wasn't aspiring to be a judge that I did that. I did that because in every activity I undertook, I tried to do it as well as I humanly could. And so how do you do that? Forget about the noise. Listen to this and this, and figure out what you need to do for yourself. And if you keep your eye on making a difference, you'll make a difference. As long as you're not selfishly, well, no, I don't think that's right. You can selfishly decide you want to make money in life. My friend Rudy did. No, at law school he said he was going to retire at 40, uga rich. And he came to Miami, joined a huge, I'm sorry I'm telling your story this way, but it's true. And he became uga rich, but he's used his money for all sorts of public interest pursuits. And he's supported so many non-for-profit organizations. He's promoted lawyers of Hispanic backgrounds in every job he's had. He's done everything you would want to do as a caring citizen for his community. And I tell people there's nothing wrong with making money. It's what you do with the money you make. That defines you. And so I've got plenty of law clerks who are also doing very, very well. Every one of them is involved in the public pro bono work of their law firms. And so they balance their business needs, their business likes, their business passions with their heart. And that's all any of us can do. So if you happen to be a young person who wants to be an accountant, it's not the most public position in the world, but I know plenty of accountants who love helping their companies succeed and thrive and flourish. And others who take their skills with big companies and volunteer for not-for-profit small organizations and help them with their books. There is always a way to serve. Don't be ashamed of your ambitions or your desires. There's nothing wrong with an ambition and desire unless you're not thinking of others in the process. But you can do that and combine almost anything you want to do. Manage expectations by setting your own.
On that incredibly wise advice, I think we're just wrapping up. Thank you, Justice, for this gift of your time.
Thank you for being here. Before we end, I want to thank the Knight Foundation, of which you are its main representative now. I want to thank the president of Miami Dade College, who has collaborated with us and made these facilities available to us. I want to thank the organization on whose board I'm on, which is icivics.org, which was started by my colleague, Sandra Day O'Connor, who had the perception to see that the discourse in our country was becoming very partisan and negative. And she correlated that with the fact that civic education was declining in our schools. And she tied it to STEM, that as the country became more invested in STEM classes, they had to drop civics classes because there's only certain hours in the day that kids can go to school. And what suffered, and it's still true today, is civics classes. When you look at the statistics, we spend $50 on, as a country, as a federal government and state governments, $50 on civic education and on STEM and 5 cents on civic education. So $50 worth versus 5 cents. But she had that insight and started iCivics to teach civics in video games to middle school children. I challenge every one of you to go on the iCivics website and play the games. Even trained lawyers will not pass all of the games. It even teaches adults things, okay? It's now expanded iCivics to do high school and college, and we're thinking about or moving towards. The executive director of iCivics is here with me, so I'm looking at her, to do some materials for grammar school. So we're expanding, but I joined the board after my sister left and life took a turn differently. But I've been very proud of my participation in it, and it really has been a partnership of the heart, because I think civic education is critical to the type of inspiration that I think is important. And so I thank everyone here for your part in bringing this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Justice and Maribel. At your seats is an original illustration by Melissa Gutierrez, a local artist. Where are you, Melissa? You can stand up? It's an illustration of the Freedom Tower, and it's a postcard that has a message on the back to commemorate this very special day that Justice Sotomayor joined us. So thank you very much, Justice, and that'll conclude the evening. If you can all remain seating while the Justice leaves the building, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks.